Hi, good afternoon, and welcome to the webinar all about DOJ recognition and accreditation. We're so glad you could join us today. My name is Silvana Arista, and I'm a Field Support Coordinator in Clinic's Capacity Building section. Laura Burdick is also here with us today. She is also a Field Support Coordinator in Capacity Building section. So here's an overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to go over a background of the recognition and accreditation program, the eligibility requirements for recognition and staff accreditation, the application process, getting started, and then we will go ahead and review some resources that we have at the end. We'll also have time for questions. So before we get started, I wanted to provide you with tips on using this platform to communicate with the presenters and for asking questions. You should be able to see a questions box on your screen. Please type in any comments or questions that you have there. We're going to take questions at the end of the webinar, but there will be a couple opportunities in the middle of the webinar to respond to a few questions related to what we've covered at that point. This webinar will last for about an hour and a half, and a recorded version of this webinar will be posted on Clinic's website under the Training, Webinar, and Webinar Archives section. You should be able to see a handout of the slides there. And so let's go ahead and get started.
Okay, hi everyone, this is Laura. So we'll just start with some background information. What is Department of Justice recognition and accreditation? This is a US government program that allows recognized organizations and their non-attorney staff who are accredited representatives to provide immigration legal services and represent clients. And you can find the qualifications for recognition of organizations and accreditation of their representatives in the immigration regulations at the citation shown here. So why should you apply for DOJ recognition and accreditation, and how could it benefit your program? There are a lot of good reasons. First, it allows you to maintain or increase your capacity to provide services to the immigrant community. So it's a way for you to provide immigration legal services without an attorney, or to continue providing legal services if you have an attorney who subsequently leaves your program. Also, it's a way to strengthen and professionalize your program, and it's beneficial to your community because it makes affordable and professional legal services more easily available. It ensures better and more complete client services because representatives can receive a copy of all of the correspondence that the government sends to the clients and can represent clients at interviews with USCIS or before a judge in immigration court if they have full accreditation. It ensures quality immigration advice because quite a bit of substantive immigration law training is required in order to get accreditation, and then ongoing training is required to maintain it. Generally, there are lower staffing costs for accredited representatives compared to attorneys, so that's another reason why organizations choose to use accredited representatives. And then most importantly, it allows you to avoid a big problem in immigration communities, which is unauthorized practice of immigration law. So the Department of Justice maintains a roster of recognized agencies and accredited staff. So we have the link here if you'd like to see who has recognition and accreditation in your local area. On the roster, I just checked yesterday, and there are currently over 700 recognized organizations and over 1,900 accredited representatives around the country. And that may sound like a lot, but I think we all know that the demand for low-cost services is higher than what we can currently meet. So there's definitely a need for even more organizations to pursue recognition and accreditation, and that's why Clinic strongly promotes it. In 2017, we had a major change in the rules governing recognition and accreditation. Those rules had been mostly unchanged for decades, going all the way back to 1984. And the process of revising the rules began in 2012 when Eoir asked the public for input on possible amendments. Clinic and other organizations provided input at that time and throughout the process that followed. And then we had a final rule that took effect on January 18th of 2017. And with that rule, the administration of the Recognition and Accreditation Program was transferred from the Board of Immigration Appeals, or BIA, to the Office of Legal Access Programs, or OLAP. And so the program is now called DOJ Recognition and Accreditation, rather than the old term that we used to use, which was BIA Recognition and Accreditation. Another recent change I wanted to mention is that in August of 2019, there was an interim rule reorganizing Eoir that took effect immediately. And with that rule, OLAP, along with the Recognition and Accreditation Program, was moved from the Office of the Director to the Office of Policy at Eoir. And another update I wanted to mention is Eoir has released revised versions of the application forms for recognition and accreditation, which is the Eoir 31 and Eoir 31A. And those are posted on its website along with the old versions of the forms because OLAP will still accept the old version of the forms, which is the January 2017 edition. We have a number of concerns about the revision process and the content of the new forms, so we are strongly encouraging people to use the old forms for now. And we submitted comments to DOJ outlining our concerns, and those are posted on our website. Also, the Office of Inspector General, or OIG, recently completed an audit of the Recognition and Accreditation Program and issued a report that came out in September of last year, recommending quite a few changes to the RNA program. Eoir responded to the audit and said that it planned to implement most of the recommended changes. Some examples of the recommended changes are having a sort of CLE type requirement when renewing accreditation. So you would have to have a certain number of hours in immigration training, requiring a certificate of completion for every training presented in the accreditation application, and requiring background checks for all accreditation applicants. Again, those are the recommended changes from the audit. Clinic submitted a response to the audit as well, objecting to some of the recommendations. And we have a link here to the audit if you'd like to read the report and then the response from Eoir to the report. So let's turn now to the eligibility requirements for recognition of organizations. First, the organization must be a nonprofit, religious, charitable, social service, or similar organization. It must provide services primarily to low-income and indigent clients within the US. If the organization charges fees, then it must have a written policy for accommodating people who are unable to pay those fees. The organization must have federal tax-exempt status, and it must have at least one accredited representative on staff. So that means that when you apply for recognition of an organization, you have to also apply for at least one staff person to be accredited at the same time. And organizations that lose their accredited representative and that lack anyone who's accredited will be placed on inactive status and will eventually lose their recognition unless they apply for a new person to be accredited. The organization must have access to adequate knowledge, information, and experience on immigration law and procedure. That's demonstrated primarily through the qualifications of the staff. And the organization must designate an authorized officer to act on its behalf. That is basically a point of contact for OLAP in case they have questions. That authorized officer is responsible for updating OLAP on any changes to the organization or its staff, and they are responsible for certifying that the information contained in the applications is true. Also, I wanted to mention that recognition is tied to a particular office address or location. It's strictly tied to that location. So you cannot offer services at other locations without getting those locations recognized as well. In addition to changing some of the eligibility requirements for recognition, the final rule also made some other changes. First is that recognition must be renewed every 6 years, so there's a 6-year cycle. First-time recognition for organizations that have not had it is conditional for 2 years, so you would need to renew after 2 years, and then you would get on the 6-year cycle. Organizations without federal tax exempt status can be approved for recognition if they've applied for the status, and they can show evidence that they've applied and it's pending, and then they would need to show that they've obtained the status at the time that they renew their recognition 2 years later. If you have sub-offices, you can request extension of recognition to those offices and file a single application for all of your office locations. And recognized organizations are subject to certain requirements for reporting, record keeping, and posting, and we'll say more about this later. And then you must use the application forms, Eoir 31 and 31A, and both of those are mandatory. A little bit more about extension of recognition to sub-offices or additional office locations where you wish to provide immigration services. So in lieu of filing a separate application for each sub-office, you can file a single application for 2 or more offices of the organization. But the regulations say that for each sub-office, you have to attest that your organization periodically conducts inspections, exercises supervision and control over the accredited representatives at that location, and provides adequate legal resources for the staff at that location. And the regulations also say that OLAP may require separate recognition if there are distinct operations, management structure, or funding sources between the different office locations. And we'll have more information a little bit later on what documentation is needed in a request for extension of recognition. So turning now to staff accreditation, there are 2 levels of staff accreditation, partial and full. Partial accreditation allows representation before DHS only. So it would allow you to represent clients before USCIS on administrative cases like a citizenship application or representing someone at a citizenship interview, for example. Full accreditation allows representation of clients not only before DHS, but also before Eoir, which is the Immigration Court and the Board of Immigration Appeals. It does not, however, allow representation of clients in state courts or federal courts of appeal, so it's only before the Immigration Court. The vast majority of individuals who are accredited are partial accredited representatives, but a partial accredited representative can apply for full accreditation at any time, provided that they meet the qualifications. And then accreditation needs to be renewed every 3 years. So what are the eligibility requirements for accreditation? First, the person must be an employee or volunteer of the organization. And it's important to note that accreditation is strictly tied to the organization and the particular office site or sites that are recognized. Once the person leaves the organization and is no longer working for them as a staff person, paid or volunteer, they would automatically lose their accreditation. So it's strictly tied to the organization. Also, the person has to have the character and fitness to represent clients. They must possess broad knowledge and adequate experience in immigration law and procedures. And you demonstrate this through your formal trainings on immigration law, as well as hands-on experience in immigration law. For the formal training, you must have at least 1 training. Of according to the regulations, that provides a solid overview of the fundamentals of immigration law. And then for adequate experience, you have to have hands-on experience shadowing or working with clients under the supervision of an authorized provider, such as an attorney or an accredited representative from another organization. The applicant for accreditation cannot be an attorney who's eligible to practice law in the US because accreditation is only for non-attorneys. The person cannot have resigned while under a disciplinary investigation or proceeding. They can't be subject to any order disbarring or restricting their practice of law, and they cannot be convicted of a serious crime anywhere in the world. So what is character and fitness? This is a similar standard to what's required of attorneys. So according to the new rule, this includes things like whether the person has a criminal background, whether they have prior acts involving dishonesty, fraud, deceit, or misrepresentation, whether they have a past history of neglecting professional, financial, or legal obligations, and whether they have a current immigration status that presents an actual or perceived conflict of interest. And character and fitness is demonstrated primarily through the attestations of the authorized officer of the organization and the proposed representative, where they sign to that effect in the Eoir 31A application. It's also can be demonstrated through the letters of recommendation for the person, as well as a favorable background check. And OLAP is now conducting a background check on every applicant for accreditation. I think I'm going to stop there for just a few minutes and check with Silvana and see if there are any questions.
Yes, there are a few here. Let me see here. There was a question about multiple offices. Is it possible to have an office and a mobile extension or sub-office?
A mobile office. That would be rare, but we do have an affiliate that received recognition a few years ago for a mobile office unit. It was a van, I believe, that was outfitted as a mobile immigration office with computers and office equipment and supplies that were needed to represent clients and to travel from place to place. So we have seen that. Yes.
Okay, and then here's another question. What do you mean you must have one accredited representative to be eligible? My organization doesn't have any DOJ accredited representatives, but we have 2 attorneys and a paralegal. Can I still apply?
So organizations that have attorneys on staff do not need to apply for recognition and accreditation in order to offer immigration services. They can offer them through their licensed attorneys and staff who are working under the supervision of attorneys, in other words, the paralegal staff. If an organization, though, wants to apply for recognition and accreditation with attorneys on staff, they could apply for their non-attorney staff to be accredited representatives, and that would give the staff, more qualifications, more independence, because they could work more independently from the attorneys, and they could file G28s and serve as the legal representative for the client, represent them at interviews, etc. So there are advantages to applying for recognition and accreditation for organizations that already have attorneys on staff. However, you do have to maintain at least one accredited representative on staff, even if you have attorneys. So, if the organization obtained recognition and accreditation and later lost its only accredited representative, it would go on inactive status and would lose its recognition unless it applied for another person to be accredited.
Great. So there's one more question, and then all the other ones have to do with accreditation. So I was going to maybe wait until the end. But this one says, how do you define sub-office? I am confused that it says if 2 offices, then you need to apply separately, but not so with a sub-office. How do they distinguish second office from sub-office?
So if your organization has a main office and then 1 or more additional office locations, perhaps regionally, for example, in other cities in your region, and you want to offer services at those other offices, you can choose to apply for extension of recognition from the main office to the sub-offices, and you could do that with 1 single application. That's your choice. You don't have to apply for extension. If you choose, you could apply for separate recognition for each of your office locations. However, the concept of extension of recognition was created under the new rule that was implemented in 2017 in order to make it easier for organizations to apply for recognition of multiple office locations, because again, it allows you to file a single application for more than 1 office location. So it makes it easier in that sense, but it's up to you whether you wish to get those offices recognized under extension or you want to file a separate application.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the application and the process. So here's an overview of what you need for the recognition application. We recommend using a brief cover letter to present the application, along with either a table of contents or a list of enclosures. And then you will need the form Eoir 31 along with the application. We have a link here, but I just want to point out again that you will see that there are 2 versions of the Eoir 31 on the Eoir website, and we strongly recommend that you use the old edition of the form, which is dated January of 2017, rather than the newer edition. And then along with that, you will need supporting documentation. And again, keep in mind that you must also include at least 1 application for accreditation along with your recognition application. And if you take a look at our website, we have a step-by-step guide for recognition and accreditation. It's linked at the end of the presentation. And in that guide, you can find a sample cover letter for recognition, sample supporting documents, and tips for the application. So here are some of the key supporting documents that you need when you're applying for recognition of your organization. First, you need proof that you're a nonprofit, religious, charitable, social service, or similar organization. And for that, you need your organizing documents. So things like your agency mission statement, constitution, charter, bylaws, articles of incorporation, etc. And then you need proof of your federal tax exempt status. Typically, what we use is an IRS tax determination letter, but you could provide some alternative documentation of the status as well. And again, if you don't yet have the status, you can still qualify, but you have to submit proof that you've applied for the federal tax exempt status and your application is pending. And then you need to provide evidence of your knowledge of immigration law and procedures. Again, that's demonstrated mainly through your staff. So you will submit an organizational chart for the immigration program showing the staff by name, by title, showing the supervision and oversight of the staff. You will need evidence of a technical legal support arrangement if applicable. You'll need resumes for the staff showing their knowledge and experience in immigration law, and evidence of their training in immigration law, like training certificates, letters of recommendation, etc. You'll also need a list of law library materials that the organization has available for its staff to use. Those materials can be online or hard copy. Usually we submit a combination of both when we help our affiliates. You will also need evidence of providing services primarily to low-income and indigent clients. And for that, you'll need to submit a budget for the immigration program, showing the income and expenses for the program. You'll need fee schedules for all of the locations where you're seeking to offer services, a list of membership dues if you charge membership dues, and then your fee waiver or reduction policy or guidance if you charge fees. And then there may be other documentation just depending on your individual situation. A little bit more about the technical legal support that I mentioned. It's important to include documentation of this in your application for recognition if you don't have an immigration attorney on staff. If you do have an attorney on staff, then you don't need to worry about technical legal support. So what is this? Again, this is part of the requirement of demonstrating that you have access to adequate knowledge, information, and experience in immigration law. And it means that you should have access to an attorney or a fully accredited representative from another organization who can answer any questions that you have about immigration law or a particular case that you're working on. And Clinic provides technical legal support to our affiliates through our Ask the Experts service. So we have a lot of organizations that choose to join our network in order to obtain the technical legal support that they need for their recognition. Other times, organizations will have an agreement with a local immigration attorney to provide that support, either pro bono or for a fee, or they may be part of another network or have another partnership with another organization to provide that. So when you file the application for agency recognition, you should include the letter documenting that you have access to the technical legal support. And if you're a Clinic affiliate, your field support coordinator will give you a letter to include in your application. So if you'd like more information about how to become an affiliate, we have the link here for you. I wanted to talk a little bit about recognition renewal. Remember, you have to renew recognition either on a 6-year cycle, or if you got it for the first time, it will be given on a conditional basis for 2 years, and then you'll have to renew it. So with a recognition renewal application, you have to demonstrate that you remain eligible for recognition, that you still meet the eligibility requirements. So you'll submit the form Eoir 31 with a cover letter and updated documentation as needed for anything that has changed since your previous recognition. So you can take a look at a sample cover letter for recognition renewal in our step-by-step guide. And the typical documents that we'll submit would be an organizational chart for the staff, since we know that's something that changes frequently, staffing, a technical legal support letter that's updated if applicable, an updated list of law library resources, because remember, immigration law changes quickly and we need to keep our resources up to date. And you'll need a budget for the immigration program for the current year and the previous year when you apply for recognition renewal. And then you will also need to include annual summaries of your immigration legal services and fee schedules that you have used since your last recognition date, whether that was 2 years ago or 6 years ago. Also, if you are on inactive status because you don't have any accredited representatives and you're due to renew your agency recognition, you must file that renewal application on time. So sometimes it can be confusing for folks. You know, they're waiting to get another staff person accredited, but if your renewal date comes up, you are required to file timely for the renewal. What OLAP will do is they will hold the application and they won't approve it until you have a staff person ready to be approved for accreditation. For an extension of recognition application, you would submit, again, the form Eoir 31, and we recommend that January 2017 edition, along with a cover letter and documentation of your eligibility for extension. So remember, for extension, you have to demonstrate supervision and control by the main office over its sub-offices, and you have to demonstrate that all of the offices share the same funding, management, and operations in order to be eligible for extension. So typically, we would submit the following documentation shown here. We submit a current organizational chart, which we use to demonstrate the supervision and control. You'll want to show the relationship between the main office and the sub-offices and where each staff person is located. You can find a sample in our step-by-step guide of what that would look like for an organization with sub-offices seeking extension. So on the organizational chart, you'll see that we note where the supervisor is based and how often they visit the extension office for supervision. You would also submit a list of law library resources for all of your locations that you're seeking recognition for, because again, you have to show adequate resources that are available to the extension sites. We would submit a single current budget for the immigration program that includes the main office and the extension office or offices, because you want to show that they have the same funding and operations. And then we would submit a current fee schedule that's used by all of the offices, and we would want to see the same fee schedule in order to show that those offices have the same funding and operations. I wanted to note that the new form Eoir 31 does require quite a bit of additional information on the extension request, but again, we recommend using the old form. And also the new FAQs that were recently posted by OLAP on their website, and those are linked at the end of the presentation, have a long list of questions about the extension office that you should be prepared to answer with the request for extension. Those are on page 38 of the FAQs. Okay, so for the accreditation application, here is what you would need for that. We would use a brief cover letter with the table of contents or list of enclosures in it. You would file the form Eoir 31A, application for staff accreditation, and then your supporting documentation for that. And again, go to our step-by-step guide and you'll find a sample cover letter for accreditation and the sample supporting documents. So here's a list of the key supporting documents for an application for staff accreditation. We would include a resume for the person documenting their immigration law experience, as well as their trainings that they've completed and the different immigration forms that they have training and experience working on. And then we would include evidence for the trainings, so copies of certificates, agendas, and any other proof of the trainings attended. The person would need 2 letters of recommendation addressing their knowledge and experience in immigration law. And at least one of those letters should come from an attorney or an accredited representative with knowledge in immigration law who can vouch for that applicant's knowledge. And character reference letters are helpful, but not required. We like to include the character reference in the knowledge and experience letters so we can just cover all of our bases rather than having separate letters. And then if you're applying for full accreditation, you'll need to submit additional evidence of court skills training and experience. Let's see, and I wanted to give you a couple of important updates. We just had a meeting with the director of the Office of Legal Access Programs yesterday, and we learned that OLAP is now conducting a background check on every applicant for accreditation. And for the background check, they need your date of birth and your full name. The date of birth is not requested in the old version of the Eoir 31A. It is in the new version that came out last year, but we're not recommending use of the new version for now. We will be recommending to our affiliates to put that information for the background check in the cover letter in order to avoid a delay on the application. If they don't have it, they'll send you an RFE requesting that you provide the information, the date of birth, and the full name for the background check. So we'll be providing that information up front. Also, they told us that they are requiring a certificate of completion for every immigration training presented in the application. That's not been the case in the past. And we've been getting RFEs from OLAP for other evidence of the trainings in the form of an affidavit. So if there are trainings that are missing a certificate, you will be asked for an affidavit in lieu of a certificate. So we will be, going forward, we'll be providing the affidavit upfront in the application in order to avoid the RFE, which would just delay the process. Okay, so a little bit about full accreditation. What is required when you're applying for full accreditation? It's a lot harder to get than partial accreditation because of the additional training and experience that's required in court practice. And again, the vast majority of accredited representatives are partial and they'll remain partial, so you don't have to apply for a full accreditation after partial. You can remain partially accredited. It's really a decision that the organization needs to make about whether it makes sense for them to expand their services to court representation if that's not something they already provide. So in general, if you want to apply for full accreditation, we will recommend that you first find a local attorney or a fully accredited representative to serve as your mentor in your local area. And then you need to get hands-on experience observing cases in immigration court and working on court cases under the supervision of your mentor. So that would be legal research and writing experience. You should also try to get formal training on court skills, things like cancellation of removal, asylum, court rules and procedures, advocacy skills that you need for court practice. And then the mentor would need to write you a strong letter of support attesting to your knowledge and experience with court cases. And of course, you would need since you need 2 letters, you would need a second letter from either another attorney or your supervisor. And if you take a look again at our step-by-step guide, you will, and our toolkit as well, you will find additional resources and tips and information on how to apply for full accreditation. So for accreditation renewal, the process is the same, whether you're renewing full or partial accreditation. You have to demonstrate that you remain eligible for accreditation. So you will submit the form Eoir 31A along with a cover letter and supporting documentation. Again, use the January 2017 edition of the Eoir 31A. And your supporting documentation would be an updated resume for the staff person with a list of trainings that they've attended since their last accreditation date. Those trainings should be recent and ongoing because we know that immigration law changes rapidly and we have to stay up to date. You also need proof of the trainings. As I said, OLAP will want a certificate now or an affidavit if the certificate is missing. And you will need a copy of the last letter of accreditation approval received from OLAP. And also I want to note that letters of recommendation are not required for renewal of accreditation. Those are only required for initial accreditation. So there's less documentation that's required when you're renewing accreditation. As far as the application process for recognition and accreditation, You would file the Eoir 31 for agency recognition and the 31A for each staff person seeking accreditation. Those forms have a section that includes proof of service on your USCIS district director. So you're going to send one complete copy of your application packet to your USCIS district director. And you should check the USCIS website for the correct address and make sure that you don't send it to the field office. It has to go to the district office. OLAP now prefers that you file your application via email. So make sure that you get confirmation of receipt of the application. You know, if it's paper, we would use, you know, some sort of delivery service that provides confirmation of receipt. But if it's email, you'll just want to make sure that you get a response from OLAP indicating that they received your application via email. And keep in mind that you will still have to send a paper copy of the application by regular mail to the USCIS district director. After receiving your application, OLAP reviews it and they may contact you to request additional or missing information. But this will delay your application, so it is important to include all the required information in your initial application. And then after OLAP determines that your application is complete, your USCIS district director has 30 days to respond to your application, and they can recommend for or against approval of your application. In our experience, most of the USCIS offices are silent. Some will respond with a letter. We are seeing more and more of them, I guess, respond with a letter as they've been encouraged to get involved. OLAP would like more involvement of the USCIS district offices. So that's something we expect to see more of. In our experience, a few of the USCIS offices will conduct a site visit to your agency and actually interview the staff before responding. So a few of them will get heavily involved in the process, but just a few. And it's rare in our experience for USCIS to oppose an application, at least for one of our affiliates. Processing time on the application for different types of applications varies a lot. I can tell you that currently there's a big backlog at OLAP, so recognition applications filed in January of last year are being adjudicated now, which means that there's about a 14-month processing backlog on those. And for accreditation applications, if it's a standalone accreditation application, they told us they're handling applications filed in October, but we have people who've been waiting longer, so we're seeing about a 6-month delay on the standalone accreditation applications. So I wanted to mention that in order to avoid any snags with USCIS, it's a really good idea, and we recommend that you contact your local USCIS office before you apply and introduce your organization and your services. You can invite your community relations officer from USCIS to visit you. I know people aren't doing much in person, but hopefully this will resume in the not too distant future. But in any case, you should reach out to that person and introduce yourself. You should also start attending any meetings that your USCIS office holds with community-based organizations in your area. Having that good relationship with USCIS will not only help your application for RNA, but it will also facilitate your immigration casework. Once OLAP makes a decision on your application, they will send a letter with a decision in writing, and they'll issue a separate decision for recognition and for accreditation of each staff person. Okay, here we have just some tips for your application. It's important to include all of the supporting documentation in the initial application in order to avoid RFEs that will delay your application. So make sure that it is complete. At the same time, don't include unnecessary information. Sometimes people think that the more that they submit, the better, and they'll include a lot of information that's not required. In our experience, that can backfire because it can invite unnecessary scrutiny of your application by OLAP. So we recommend that you submit everything that's required, but nothing more. So nothing more or less than what's required. You should describe your trainings and your immigration experience in detail, but we do not recommend giving the hours of training or the hours of hands-on shadowing that you've done. In our experience, listing the hours can lead to additional scrutiny or even denial of the application. So we find that it's better to describe the content of the experience and the training in detail. For example, for your hands-on experience, we recommend describing in detail the types of cases that you've worked on and the types of processes that you have experience with. For example, screening and intake of clients, gathering documents, application assistance, case management and follow-up, scheduling appointments, handling RFEs, closing a case, all of those processes that are involved in an immigration case. Also, make sure that the information in your application is consistent. This is a common problem that we see. Sometimes the supporting documentation, one document is inconsistent with the information in another document, or the information in the Eoir 31 is inconsistent with one of the supporting documents, for example, and that will lead to additional questions and delays on your application if there are inconsistencies. So do be careful about that. Also, respond to any OLAP requests promptly. For that, I think it's important to be careful about who you designate as your authorized officer for your organization. Make sure that it is someone who checks their email regularly and who can see an email from OLAP, because they will send any questions via email, and make sure that person will see the email and respond promptly. If you don't respond, that can lead to delays or even a denial on your application. And then if you're a clinic affiliate, we strongly recommend that you seek help from your field support coordinator before you apply, so that we can review the application and make sure everything looks okay before you file it. It's a lot easier to fix a problem before you apply than afterwards. And then I wanted to mention that if you're a partner in the New Americans campaign, you can receive help from a clinic field support coordinator with your application as well. So we have more information on the last slide. And I think I'm going to stop again there and see if Silvana has any questions that have come in.
Yeah. Yes. So we had several questions about. I'm sorry, I keep hearing an echo.
Oh, I can't.
We had several. Oh, good. Okay. So we had several questions about non-citizens being accredited representatives and if this was viewed as a conflict of interest. So LPRs, documented individuals. Can you speak to this?
Sure. We have had approvals of accredited representatives in our network who are DACA recipients. You don't have to be a citizen. You do need to have some legal status. I would just share with you the character and fitness discussion that's in the final rule on recognition and accreditation that was published in January of 2017. So they talked about what that means with regards to immigration status, and you can take a look at that. But it says that the department will likely not accredit individuals who are in active deportation, exclusion, or removal proceedings, or who have been issued a notice of intent to revoke or terminate an immigration status until the matter is completed. And it says, similarly, individuals who are under an order of removal will generally not be eligible for accreditation unless they have received, for example, TPS or deferred enforced departure. Again, we have had success with people who have DACA or other types of statuses and other types of non-citizens successfully getting accreditation.
Great. So there was a question about, do in-house trainings count since there is no official certificate provided?
You should create a certificate, I think, for in-house trainings if you're going to be using those. And I would distinguish, in-house trainings. I would distinguish formal trainings from hands-on experience. So usually when people have in-house training, a lot of times they're referring to the shadowing and the hands-on experience that they have working with clients. If your organization wants to provide formal training, I think that's fine, but it should be well documented. So you should create some kind of a certificate for the staff, have an agenda showing what was covered, and have other detailed information about the training if you wish to use that in your application to OLAP.
And then a question came up about how far in advance should people be submitting their applications for accreditation and recognition renewal?
That's a good question. For accreditation and recognition renewal, you are required under the rule to submit prior to your expiration date. So as long as it's before your expiration date, it's considered timely. Now, as a best practice, if you look at the OLAP FAQs, they will, I believe they've now said, they had said 60 days before expiration in the past, but now they might have changed it to 90 days. I'll have to check to be sure. So that's a best practice though. We usually recommend our affiliates submit 60 days before an expiration date, just as a best practice. But again, as long as it's filed before the expiration date, it's considered timely. And that if it's timely filed, that means that your status remains valid while the application is pending.
Okay. There was a question about how many hours of training one should have.
Yeah, I think I'll cover that in one of the slides coming up on training. But usually people will present, in our experience, people are usually presenting a clinic training that's called Comprehensive Overview of Immigration Law. And that's a 6-week intensive e-learning course. Or they'll be presenting something called a 40-hour in-person training that's offered by other organizations, not from clinic. But those two trainings will usually form the foundation of an application for accreditation. And I'll go into a little more detail about the trainings coming up.
Oh, great. Thanks.
All right. Let's continue. So after you have recognition and accreditation, your organization is subject to certain requirements for reporting, record keeping, and posting. And specifically, the regulations say that a recognized organization has a duty to promptly report any changes to OLAP within 30 days. Changes may include things like a change to your organization's name, a change of address, a change in your authorized officer if that person leaves or you just want to change to a different person, a change in the name of your accredited representative. Sometimes, for example, people get married and change their names. and particularly a change in the employment or volunteer status of an accredited representative. If the person leaves your organization, they're no longer working, paid or volunteer for your organization, you need to promptly notify OLAP so they can remove that person's name from the roster. But a lot can change, so it's important to be aware of the duty to report those changes to OLAP. When you report a change, it's very simple. You can simply send an email to OLAP. You send it to the Recognition and Accreditation Program Coordinator. The email is found on the OLAP RNA page, and that's linked at the end of the slides. And that email should come from your authorized officer. That is the person who is supposed to be responsible for keeping OLAP up to date on those changes. Also, recognized organizations have record-keeping requirements. They are required to compile their fee schedules and an annual summary of their immigration services and retain them for 6 years from the date the record is created. And I have some more information about that in a moment. And then for the posting requirements, organizations may be required by OLAP to post certain public notices about RNA, but there have been no posting requirements given yet. So we're still waiting to see what OLAP may instruct recognized organizations to do in this regard. What happens if a program loses its only accredited representative? So the organization, of course, must notify OLAP promptly of the change in its staff. At that point, OLAP would remove the organization from its roster and place the organization on inactive status for up to 2 years. And they would send the organization a letter indicating that they had been placed on inactive status. And I would say make sure, if that happens, that you keep a copy of that letter and keep it in a safe place, because once your information is removed from the roster, you won't be able to see that anymore. But the letter that you receive will have that information in there. It will let you know when your deadline is to get off of the inactive status. What that means for the organization, though, when it's inactive and it loses its only accredited representative, is that it can no longer file G28s or provide legal representation to clients unless it has an attorney who can oversee those services. The organization must renew recognition by the expiration date, even if it's on inactive status. I think I mentioned that before. Even if it falls when you're on inactive status, you still must timely renew recognition. And then the organization has to apply for a new staff person to be accredited in order to keep its recognition. For this reason, we strongly recommend having at least 2 accredited representatives on staff in order to avoid any disruption in your services. So a little bit more about the annual summary. We mentioned that this is part of the record keeping requirement, and also this is one of the documents that you have to submit when you're renewing your agency recognition. So what's in the annual summary? You need to provide the total number of clients served by your organization. And again, this is an annual summary, so it's for a calendar year, January to December. We send a reminder to our affiliates in January of a new year, reminding them to compile their annual summary for the previous calendar year. So it's important to do that in a timely way. So you'll need to provide the total number of clients served during that time frame, as well as the total number of clients served at no cost. That means if you charge fees for your organization's immigration services, how many clients did you serve at no cost for a fee waiver of your organization's fee? You need to provide a general description of your immigration legal services and any other immigration-related services that you provided during that period, whether that would mean educational services like citizenship classes or outreach events that you provided. You need to provide a statement regarding whether your services were provided pro bono or you charge clients in accordance with a fee schedule. And then if you charge fees, you need to provide your policies or guidance on fee waivers and reduced fees, as well as a list of the offices or locations where you provided immigration legal services during that period, and then attach your fee schedule or schedules for that reporting period. So, for example, if you had a fee schedule that you used until April of that year, and then you updated it, and you had a new fee schedule, you would compile both of those fee schedules since you used two different fee schedules during that time frame. Clinic has created a sample annual summary form that you can use to compile this information. It's posted in our recognition and accreditation toolkit. And I would just say make sure that you have a system in place to collect this information annually. And don't wait until your renewal to try to create those annual summaries. If you're having to go back several years to find information, that can be very difficult if you haven't kept up with those annual summaries. Let's say you've decided to go ahead and pursue recognition and accreditation. How do you get started? We recommend first that you get training in immigration law, that formal training, as well as hands-on experience. Those are usually the components that will take the longest. Begin to gather your supporting documents for your application, especially documents that will take time for you to develop, things like a fee schedule, a fee waiver, policy, budget for your immigration program. Reach out to your local USCIS office, as I mentioned earlier, to introduce yourself and your organization. Secure your technical legal support if needed. Figure out if you need that, if you're going to find a local attorney or join a network like Clinic. Gather and purchase your law library resources for your program as well. And if you're taking the comprehensive overview of immigration law training through Clinic, then we recommend that you download a copy of the manual for that training and keep that for your law library. In terms of specific formal trainings to prepare for accreditation, this is what we normally recommend. As I mentioned earlier, there's the Clinic COIL course, which is the 6-week e-learning course. Also, other organizations offer a 40-hour in-person training that also provides a good foundation for accreditation. And then in addition to either a COIL or a 40-hour, we usually recommend taking a variety of other trainings on different topics, depending on your area that you're going to be practicing in, your interests, and just making sure that you're up to date on recent changes in immigration law. Clinic offers a lot of webinars that are available on our calendar on our website. We also have an archive of webinars that are posted on our website. Those are free, that are available. And we also recommend that people join the Immigration Advocates Network, which is free for nonprofits. And they also have an archive of recorded webinars that you can find and take there. Make sure that your trainings are recent. Recent is not defined, but we recommend that they should be in the last 3 years. And you can specialize in your practice of immigration law, but OLAP will want you to have broad knowledge in your training, also that you can spot issues and make appropriate referrals if needed. Here's some tips for your training. Again, it's important that it's ongoing. If we see an application where someone took a COIL or a 40-hour and it's been, months since they've taken any other trainings, we'll usually recommend that they get some recent trainings to keep up with all of the changes happening in laws and policies. We recommend a mix of different types of trainings. In person, e-learning, webinars are good. We know that nobody's doing in-person trainings right now, but that has been the case in the past. Just however you learn best. We know that some people learn best in an in-person format as opposed to e-learning, but a mix is good. Keep good records of all of the trainings that you've attended. Make sure that you're, keeping a file with all of the information on the trainings, especially the certificates, as I mentioned, since OLAP is now requiring a certificate for every training. You're going to list the trainings on the resume, and you'll see how we do that in the sample resume in our step-by-step guide. But you'll want to include details like which organization gave the training, the title of the training, the date, the location if it was in person, and the type of training if it was an e-learning course or a webinar or a conference, etc. And then make sure that you include money for ongoing training in your annual budget for your immigration program, since that will be required that you have ongoing training, and show that when you renew your accreditation. And then on this last slide, we just have some useful resources. So here is the link to the Recognition and Accreditation Toolkit and the step-by-step guide on our website. Again, that guide has all of the sample cover letters and sample application materials and tips. We are in the process of updating that right now, so we hope to be able to post an updated step-by-step guide in the next few weeks on our website. We also have a link here to the Eoir Recognition and Accreditation website. They have a new FAQ sheet that just went up a couple of weeks ago that you can find there. That also has the roster of recognized organizations and accredited staff. I have a link to the clinic training calendar as well as the Immigration Advocates Network training calendar that you can find. And again, if you're a New Americans campaign or a Coulter partner or affiliate, and you would like to receive recognition and accreditation assistance, you can contact my colleague, Helen Chen, at the email shown here. And I will go back to Silvana and see if we have any other questions we can answer.
Thanks, Laura. So one question came in that said, I am part of a nonprofit religious group and interested in getting accreditation, but the clients are more for the members of the organization. Can I still apply for accreditation to help the members?
I'm sorry, Silvana, can you repeat that question, please?
Sure. It says, I'm part of a nonprofit religious group and interested in getting accreditation, but the clients are more for the members of the organization. Can I still apply for accreditation to help the members with their visa immigration needs? So it sounds like maybe they would only serve members of the organization, not the general public.
Gotcha. Right. We have seen organizations approved that primarily serve their members. So I would say I think it's possible. OLAP is community minded, and I think they are interested in organizations that are serving the community and not limiting their services to certain groups. But again, I think we do have, I can think of at least one example of an organization I'm aware of that is a religious type organization that primarily serves their members. So I would say it is possible.
And then there were a couple questions that came in about going from partial to full, if one needs to start off as partial and then go to full, or if you apply for full and you are denied, do you maintain partial?
Sure, that's a good question. In the vast majority of cases, we have staff who are first partially accredited and then they apply for full accreditation. And again, they can apply at any time as long as they meet the qualifications. In rare cases, we do see people who go immediately to full accreditation, but I would say that it's hard to do that because you need the legal writing and research and advocacy experience. So the people that we see occasionally who do that would usually be law graduates who've had that training through law school, or people who work for a nonprofit organization that primarily provides defense from removal. And so, you know, they've been basically working as a paralegal in a program where they're assisting attorneys on court cases, and that's primarily, you know, the nature of their work. So, so it is possible to go directly to full accreditation, but most people will be partial first and then move to full. And if your full accreditation application gets denied and you're otherwise eligible for partial accreditation, then OLAP has said that they will approve you for partial accreditation.
Great. So I have a question. Are background checks also being conducted for accreditation renewals?
That's a really good question. I'm honestly not sure. I think we'll have to verify that with OLAP, but I'll make a note of that.
Absolutely. And then here's a question. Can staff provide services in 2 sites, or do they need to be tied to one office?
No, staff can travel. If you're accredited and your organization has extension of recognition to other office locations, a staff person who's accredited can travel and provide services out of any recognized office location of that organization. So, you know, you may be splitting your time between 2 different offices, for example, and that would be fine.
So there's a couple questions about getting full accreditation related to maybe resources or information or how to get mentors. Is there any information that we can provide to people on this call?
Sure. As far as trainings for full accreditation, the formal trainings can be hard to find. That's why Clinic a few years ago started offering a training program to help staff obtain full accreditation. We have a training through Clinic, a whole program that's offered once a year. And if you'd like more information about that, I'm not sure where I don't think I have a link to the page in the slides, but you could reach out to us after the webinar and we could get you some information about that. For that program, and as I said, anytime that you're applying for full accreditation, you do need to find a mentor, and that can be a challenge. So I would say, you know, that's probably the most important thing if you're looking to get full accreditation is to have a mentor, to find someone in your local area. We can sometimes help affiliates find a mentor, but we can't, you know, guarantee that. It's just a matter of trying to connect them with usually other affiliates that we know in their area. But it can be a private attorney as well. We have affiliates that have worked with private attorneys to get that experience that they need for court practice. But yeah, that can be a challenge.
Thanks. So there's another question about affidavits. They want to know if that's something that they write, or would the organization that provided the training write it?
Sure. So what we've been doing when we've been getting the RFEs is we've been having the individual who attended the training sign the affidavit, you know, attesting that they attended, you know, 1 or more immigration trainings for which the certificate is missing. So we include, you know, some details on the trainings, titles, dates, etc. And yes, and provide an affidavit that way. And we'll, since this is a new requirement, I think this is something that we will probably include in the updated step-by-step guide. We'll give a sample of an affidavit for training.
Great, thank you. So there's a question about the annual summary, total number of clients served. Should you include the total number of clients for all attorneys and DOJ accredited representatives, or is this only focusing on DOJ accredited representatives?
Sure, that's a good question. I mean, the way it's written is they're interested in your organization and how many clients your organization serves. So we would provide the total number of clients served by the organization, whether that was accredited staff or attorneys, a total.
So here's a question that came up. Does it matter if the nonprofit is in a different state? For example, the nonprofit is headquartered in DC, but our division is in Maryland.
And so an organization, I assume in this situation, is seeking recognition, but wants to get extension for an office that's across the state line. There are organizations in that situation that we've seen who've had recognition and extension to offices in other states. So I think it's possible. It's not something that we typically see in our network, so I don't have a lot of specifics for you, but I can tell you that it is possible, and we have seen that. Sorry, I would say that, if you're if your main office is in one state and you have another office in another state, you would only apply for recognition for the offices that you wish to provide immigration legal services at. So, if you only wanted to provide the services at your sub-office location and not the main office where your headquarters are, I think you could just apply for recognition of the sub-office without the main office in a situation like that.
Laura, here's a question about ongoing training. For the renewal accreditation, do you need to take the COIL again?
Sure. No, the COIL would just be for the initial accreditation. If you're applying for renewal of accreditation, we would encourage you to seek out other trainings and, try to find perhaps more advanced trainings, since you're, you would have more experience in immigration law at that point. So we have a whole menu of trainings available on our website, and as I mentioned, you can consult the Immigration Advocates Network website as well. But we would not typically recommend taking another COIL unless you needed that for some, or felt that you needed that for some reason.
So this is a good question. Can you conduct naturalization workshops outside your office? I'm assuming if you are an accredited rep, maybe they're asking about like legal work that can be done.
Sure. Yes, we have many affiliates that are recognized and offer off-site naturalization workshops. So that's definitely something that you can do. And it has come up in meetings with OLAP about, whether you would need to get those sites recognized as extensions. And OLAP has specifically said no, for the purpose of workshops, you would not need to request extension of recognition.
So another question, can you apply for partial and full at the same time?
No, you would apply for one or the other. If you want to apply for full and you're not, sure, if you qualify, OLAP has said that they would approve you for partial if if they find that you're eligible for partial but you're not eligible for full. So they would just treat it as a partial application if they found that you weren't eligible for full. But we wouldn't, when we work with our affiliates, we would not encourage someone to apply for full accreditation unless we felt, pretty certain that they were eligible.
Okay, and here's another question, kind of along the lines. If we receive partial recognition, could we present ourselves for a master calendar hearing at Eoir?
No, you would need full, that would be, representing someone in immigration court, and you would need full accreditation to represent a client in court, like in a master calendar or other type of hearing.
And here's a question just asking about like what types of trainings would count. And so it seems like, can we use this training in addition to our list of other trainings?
Mm-hmm. You mean this training that we're doing right now?
I think that's what they're, yes, I think that's what they're asking.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. This is a good training to have, and there's lots of good trainings that you can take. But for the purposes of accreditation, we would really encourage you to focus on trainings on immigration law. This is a training about a process, for getting the DOJ RNA. We're not really dealing with cases or immigration law in this training. So I think it's helpful, and you could list it since it's related to your work, but really you'd want to seek out other kinds of trainings, a COIL training, and then specific topical trainings around immigration law or the practice of immigration law.
And here's a question. Are renewals for accreditation behind as well?
Yes, they are. As far as we're seeing, they're in the same bucket with the initial renewal, with the initial accreditation applications. So I think I mentioned that OLAP told us yesterday that they're working on applications filed in October, but we have people who've been waiting longer than that, who are still waiting for a decision on their application. And it appears to be the same bucket, whether it's initial accreditation or renewal of accreditation. The good news, though, is that when you apply for renewal of accreditation, remember, if you file timely, then your accreditation remains valid while the application is pending. So you shouldn't be worried about a break in your accreditation status if you file timely for renewal.
How long is the agency accreditation and recognition after the first renewal?
You would go on a 6-year cycle after the first renewal. So if you've not had the recognition, this is your first time, you're given conditional recognition for 2 years, and then you renew after 2 years, and then you would be given 6 years of status, and thereafter you would be on a 6-year cycle of renewal.
Okay, so I have two questions that kind of are getting at the same thing. So one was asking about somebody who has full accreditation and say they don't have any cases, would they still be approved? And this other person is asking about how they provide TA support and guidance to another organization, but they don't have clients. Can their organization get accredited even if we don't provide clients direct services?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. OLAP, and I think this is discussed in the OLAP FAQs, if you want to take a look at that for more detail. But OLAP, for both partial and full accreditation renewal, they will want to see that you have been using your accreditation to represent clients. But if you can show that you have been using it in a different capacity, such as was mentioned, to provide technical support and guidance to others who are helping clients, or if you're a supervisor and you're not directly representing clients yourself, but you're supervising other staff who are representing clients, that's okay. And we've been able to get people renewed in those situations. OLAP agrees that would be appropriate. So you just have to, you'll have to go the extra mile in that situation and demonstrate that you need it and you're using it, even though you may not be representing clients directly.
Great. I'm just looking through questions that are coming in. Okay. So if an accredited representative is no longer at the organization, is there a requirement to report that, and how?
Yes, very important. If you lose an accredited representative, whether they're paid staff or volunteer, you need to promptly report it to OLAP within 30 days. And it's very simple. You would just send an email to the RNA program coordinator. You can find the email on the OLAP website, which is linked on the resources slide here. And the email should come from your authorized officer, and just let them know that that person has left, and they will update the roster and remove that person's name.
Okay, so here is a question about attending, being unable to attend a live webinar, but where you register and pay for and watch the recording. Would you still be able to count that toward the required, I guess, hours of training, even if you don't have a certificate of attendance?
Sure, yeah. If you don't have a certificate, if it's a recorded webinar or other type of training and you don't have a certificate of completion, you'll just need to provide some other evidence of having attended. So what we've been doing more recently is providing an affidavit. That's what they've been requesting for affiliates that have missing certificates. So that should be sufficient if you provide an affidavit, stating that you attended that training.
And so there was a couple questions about if you completed an immigration training required to apply for accreditation, so for instance, the COIL, and you have not applied yet, does this training have an expiration date that is valid to use on your application?
Yeah, there's no expiration date, but the training that you take and you present should be recent. And we generally consider, when we're helping affiliates, we look at trainings in the last 3 years. So I would say if your COIL is more than 3 years old, I would probably recommend retaking a COIL or something like it.
Should you include PowerPoint slides?
Oh, that's a good question. No, OLAP has told us in meetings, I think several times in the past, do not submit PowerPoint slides. They don't like the PowerPoint slides. It adds a lot of bulk to the application. So they've asked us not to do this. They want, again, to see a certificate or now an affidavit if the certificate is missing. We sometimes include agendas, and I think an agenda is fine, but no, do not submit PowerPoint slides.
Okay, so if you have an application for RNA pending, and in that following time, there's another person who wants to get accreditation, can they be added to the pending application?
That's a good question, and that I don't think I've seen that before. You could ask. I mean, I can't speak to that since I've not had that situation before, but you could contact OLAP and ask them through that email on their website. I mean, especially with these long backlogs that they have right now, it doesn't seem unreasonable to me to add an application if your application is to add an application for accreditation if your packet is just sitting with OLAP for a long time. I see no issues with adding that if OLAP allows it. I would just check with them.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just looking to see what else is coming in.
Sure. And I think we're right at the time
yeah,
limit.
we are.
So maybe just
yes,
one
we
more.
are. Okay, so if you're filing for recognition and accreditation at the same time, should both be submitted in one package, or should you separate and mail them together?
Yeah, we file them in one packet, and you'll see in the step-by-step guide, if you look at the sample letter, the sample cover letter for a new application for recognition and accreditation, you'll see that we present everything in a single packet, and you'll see in the list of enclosures how we structure the application, and that's what works well for us.
Okay, I think we're right at the end of our time here.
Okay. Great. Well, we hope the webinar was helpful for you all, and we wish you good luck with your applications.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Silvana. Thanks, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.